Hi, Frankie. I know you won't watch this, though.
Frankie's the only one. All right. So just a quick review of what we learned last week. Remember, the A value tells us what the amplitude is. And that changes for maxes and mins. And then B, I did a little research via Google, and it is affects the period. Typed in both. Affects came up. All right. Affects the period. C, or for faith, it impacts. Here she is.
Oh, sorry.
Frankie, we were recording for you on our podcast.
I shaded you in that.
I shaded you in that.
Get out. Could you sit right there? No, I can't get out. Oh,
Ew, why are you so mean?
I'm being bullied. I think I need to go to the parents' office, please. I'm still being recorded.
It's really unassigned.
They are unassigned, that is true. They're up for grabs. And then remember D, the last number affects your vertical shift, up or down. All right, now it tells you to find the amplitude, okay? Usually you're just gonna look at the A value. Okay, if I give you the equation, the amplitude is whatever is A. However, there's also a formula to calculate the amplitude, and this is only needed if you don't have the equation and they give you the graph. And that is 1/2 times the absolute value of the max value minus the min value. I literally don't even know if you ever need to use this formula, but I think on your partner test there's like 4 graphs and like 4 equations and you have to match them up. So like this could potentially help you. But most of you will just look at the amplitude and see which one goes up and down. So I don't know that you actually need this. But this formula to find out what the period is, bless you, you need to know this one for sure. And that is 2 pi divided by b, and then those are absolute value bars again. So it will make the value positive. So period equals 2 pi divided by b. Remember, the period is how long it takes for the curve to complete one cycle before it starts repeating. All right, so determine the amplitude and period without graphing the function. The amplitude is the A value. So A is 3, amplitude is 3. Easiest question you're going to get on your partner test. Listen. Now, the period, again, you have to use a formula to find this. And the formula is that the period equals the absolute value of 2 pi divided by b. So also remember from the top of the notes, the general form is A times the sine of parenthesis bx plus c plus d. So what is the b value in this example? Is it 0 or 1? 1. It is hiding in front of the x. If you put a 0 there, then 0 times x is 0. So it would be rid of, but it's a 1. So our b value is 1. So we'll plug in 2 pi divided by 1, which is then just 2 pi. If you remember, the parent function, the period of that was normally 2 pi. Now all the other ones, they're going to change. Amplitude, easiest question, it's 13. To find the period, again, we use our formula, 2 pi divided by the b value. In this case, b is 4. I do want you to reduce the fractions if possible. So 2 pi fourths would reduce to be what? Pi over 2, or 1 pi over 2. So that means instead of it taking like all 4 spaces to repeat, it's actually going to repeat really fast between 0 and pi halves. So the graph will look slightly different. All right, the next few get a little bit harder because of fractions. Obviously amplitude's not hard, that's 6. But for our period, we're going to do 2 pi divided by b, which is 1/2. What will I get when I take 2 pi and divide it by 1/2? Jenna? 4 pi. Remember, division, so 2 pi divided by 1/2. To divide fractions, we change division to multiplication of the reciprocal. So this will be 2 pi times 2 over 1, which will get me 4 pi. So that means if you're looking at the graph, it's going to take longer for the curve to complete one cycle before it repeats. Because normally it repeats at 2 pi. All right, example D, there's no amplitude. You cannot write none. What is the amplitude of the function? 1, which is our normal up to 1 down to -1, the parent function. Now for our period, this is why there's absolute value bars, because if you have a negative b value, it will become a positive. So again, when you're dividing, you're going to change that to multiplication of the reciprocal. So that should be 2/3. I'll just go ahead and make it positive at that point. So we should get 4 pi over 3. Or 4/3 pi. So you can try the last one on your own on the front.
Interruption. Charlie Craig, report to the office. Charlie Craig, report to the office.
I don't know. I wasn't before. All right, now the big question is the amplitude -3 or just 3? Just 3. The negative tells you it's a reflection. It doesn't tell you what the amplitude is. Okay. How about our period? What do we get for the period of this one? 8 pi thirds. So we should have 2 pi divided by -3/4. Again, make that 2 pi times the positive reciprocal, which will get us 8 pi over 3. Okay. Now, flipping to the back, I'm going to do like a switch on you. I'm going to give you the amplitude and period, and then I'm going to ask you to write the equation that would model that function. Okay? So we're going to take the formula that we already know, which is the period equals the absolute value of 2 pi divided by b, and we're going to switch it around. Okay? So we're going to solve for b. So you would undo division with multiplication, and then undo multiplication with division. So you end up coming up with this formula. B equals 2 pi divided by the period. Really similar, but just rearranged to solve for a different letter. The reason that this one is more useful is that I'm going to tell you what the period is, but I'm going to want you to write it in the sign notation, which is always A times the sine of bx plus c and plus d. Now in all of these, they don't tell you anything about a shift, so c and d will be 0. But we do need to identify what a and b are. Okay, so these are all sine functions. Technically, they could ask you for a cosine, and you would just change sine to cosine. But these are all sine. So the amplitude is 30, so that's a. So we can start off, y equals 30 sine of bx. Now we need to find out what b is. B will equal the formula 2 pi divided by the period. I'll probably put these on the board during your quiz. We don't have a formula sheet really for this unit. There's not that many. So the period is pi. So 2 pi divided by pi, b has to be 2. Pi's divided out. So take the 2 and plug it in, and this will be sine of 2x. Again, c and d, they don't tell you anything about shifting left, right, up, or down. So that is your equation. Okay, next one. Amplitude is 3/4. That's our a value. To find our b value, we'll take 2 pi divided by the period, which is pi halves. What do I get when I simplify that? Take the reciprocal of the denominator, make it 2 over pi, so 4. So our equation should be y equals a, which is 3/4, sine of bx, which will be 4x. And you should be putting parentheses around that, because the 4 is inside parentheses. Let's just do C, and we'll skip D. I think some of these they leave, pi ends up getting left in the answer. And that can happen sometimes. Okay, so notice the periods that they're giving us don't have pi's in them, okay, which is strange, but it can happen. So, when we're finding our b value, we'll have 2 pi divided by 3. So b actually has a pi in it this time. A is 5. So we'll get y equals 5 times the sine of 2 pi thirds x. That may happen in the homework, that pi stays up in the equation. Okay, we're going to skip over D, and we're going to go to our graphing examples. Now, what makes these graphing examples different is that you'll notice the y-axis is labeled, but the x-axis is not. Okay? There's no labels telling you what those stand for. The reason that I don't label these ones is that you would then have to modify the graph to like squish it or stretch it. So what I teach you to do rather is to relabel them to help you make one complete cycle like we normally do. And then your graph will still look like it always does, but we're just going to change what the x-axis is counting by. So instead of being pi halves, pi, 3 pi halves, and 2 pi, we're going to modify that based on the period. Okay? So, first thing we want to do is look at the equation and see what kind of transformations are taking place. So we know that the 3 is going to affect the amplitude, which is our maxes and our mins. And then we see that our b value is 4. Now, again, that affects the period, but that doesn't tell me that the period is 4. We need to calculate the period. Okay, so find the period of the function using the equation. Period equals 2 pi divided by b. Technically absolute values. So we'll plug that in. 2 pi divided by 4. Reduce that to get that the period is pi halves. Remember, the period is how long it takes for the cycle to complete one cycle of it before it repeats. So you want to take the pi halves and you want to label the last tick mark on your x-axis as pi halves. Now some students don't like writing up there because they think it gets all like squished, so you can write it down at the bottom of the graph if you want, instead of up here. Alright, now, that's the 4th marking. We're going to cut that in half to find out the 2nd marking. 4 divided by 2 would get me to 2. So we're going to take pi halves, and we're going to cut it in half, which will get me pi fourths. So that's, again, right here, you want to go to the half marking of that, which would be in the middle, and label this to be pi fourths. Now students were like, why are we skipping a space? Again, because you're going from this to half of this, which will be in the middle. Now we're going to take this and cut it in half again to find out what the single marking will be. So take pi fourths and find half of that, which will be this, which is pi eighths. Which means each marking is counting as pi eighths. Now let's see if this makes sense. 1 pi eighths, 2 pi eighths. Does 2 pi eighths reduce to pi fourths? Yeah. Okay, the next one would then be 3 pi eighths. And the last one would be 4 pi eighths. We agree 4 pi eighths is the same thing as pi halves. 4 eighths is 1/2. Alright, so once you have that labeled, you can go to the other side and just label them with negatives. So it would be negative pi eighths, negative pi fourths, negative 3 pi eighths, and negative pi halves. And you're going to graph the sine function just like you normally do. So the sine function, does that one start at 0, 0 or 0, 1? 0, 0. So put a nice big dot there. And the amplitude this time is going up to 3. So we'll go up to 3. Back down to 0. At 3 pi eighths, we'll go to negative 3. And back up to 0. Now, if you do this one on your graphing calculator, it's not going to look the same. Because your graphing calculator always counts by pi halves, 3 pi halves, so on. So it will look different. Then on the other side, just do the reverse. So go down to negative 3, 0, positive 3, and 0. Okay, last one. Also a sine curve, I believe. We have a couple things going on with our equation. We have a reflection this time, and we have an amplitude of 4. Now you're going to like the period of this one better than the last one. Probably should start with this. Take our formula, 2 pi divided by b. Just 2 pi divided by 1/2. Multiply by the reciprocal, which will be 2 over 1. So we're going to get that the period is 4 pi. You'll like this because it has no fractions. So go to the end of your graph on the x-axis, which mine is hiding, and label this to be 4 pi. This is going to take you one complete cycle to get to 4 pi. Cut it in half. What's half of 4? 2. That goes in the middle. What's half of 2? 1. So we have 1 pi, 2 pi, and 3 pi, and 4 pi. Again, some students find this one to be easier because it's fractions. All right, now we need a graphic. Sine graph starts at 0, 0. But it's a reflection, so instead of going to positive 1, it would go to negative 1. And it has an amplitude change of 4, so it should go down to negative 4. So instead of going to positive 4 to negative 4, back up to 0 at 2 pi, positive 4 at 3 pi, and 0 at 4 pi. Do the same thing on the other side in reverse. So go up, down, down. Okay, so there will be 2 of these on your quiz, which is on Thursday this week. Tomorrow's our review day, this Thursday, with a partner. Don't forget. And I will probably put directions on there, like make sure you label your own axes. And I think on your homework you'll see something that you have to do that as well. So homework is the next page in the packet, front and back. If you guys want to start working on that now, you're more than welcome to. And I'm going to come around and see if any of you have these assignments that I know some of you do. All right, Mackenzie. Let me just see which it is. And 630. Yes. Are you with us? I do.
I had this one dumpster. But it's not sure. She's like, yeah, I'm just like in the middle for a couple minutes. That's what you and Steve. And that was absolutely amazing. I also need to see 6 number 3.
We're all good. Yeah.